Hello, people of the internet. I am Andres Perez, aka Kaij Noir, and welcome to episode 33 of the Fully Endorsed podcast. I am, of course, your host, and here with me is my trusty co-host, Mr. Dylan McCandless, aka Super DM 64.
Hi.
And so for today's episode, we are going to talk about the 2014 American black comedy drama film directed by Alejandro G. Iñárritu, starring good old Michael Keaton, Zach Galifianakis, Edward Norton, and Emma Stone, on top of a whole bunch of other A-list actors. It is Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, which is perhaps the longest title since, Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. I'm not sure.
There's got to be others, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you would call this kind of title, where they have title A or title B. I'm not sure if there's a terminology for that, or how common this sort of this style of titling really is out there. But yeah,
I think it's more common in literature.
Really? Okay then. I do wonder what the purpose is, though, of having these two titles. I mean, I get the title subtitle, but this is title A or title B. It's kind of strange.
I think it's just, I couldn't pick one, so you pick. Whichever title you like better, all right?
I guess so. I imagine, for Iñárritu, he wanted the title to be The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, and meanwhile his producers were like, that sounds pretentious. Call it Birdman or some shit.
Well, in the case, when it's used for a book or something, I'm like, the author had two titles in mind and it couldn't make up his mind, right? When it's a movie, I think it's more the first title is the commercially viable title. It's the title that sounds like the name of a movie. Birdman, Dr. Strangelove, and then the secondary title is meant to allude more to what the film is actually about, the theming, stuff like that.
Right. I suppose I would much rather prefer this type of title than the current wave of Japanese light novel titles, which goes way too fucking long, where it's essentially the entire premise or pitch shoved into a title that's 25 words long, if you've ever seen any of those. Help, I'm trapped in another world and I have this sort of gimmick with me, and something else happening. That's legit how long the titles get on Japanese light novels.
Remember that anime that was Let Me Eat Your Pancreas, I think was the title?
I don't know, but anyways, Birdman. So this was a film that I saw way back in 2014. A whole good old 6 years ago, and I remember there was a lot of hype built up around this film. I saw the trailers in the theater, I believe. I forgot what movie I saw the previews in, but I remember it was a very strange looking a strange kind of film where you couldn't really exactly tell what kind of film it was supposed to be. All you knew that from the marketing was that it had Michael Keaton playing a kind of exaggerated version of himself, as he plays a character who was a former superhero actor who is trying to make a comeback, not in Hollywood per se, but rather trying to make a comeback through a stage adaptation of a short story of a writer that he used to admire. So, and of course, everything that could go wrong does go wrong, and this man is essentially going through a midlife crisis, a sort of an identity crisis, existential crisis of some sort, while dealing with while you're also getting a peek into the lives of everyone else and their own personal issues. That's what I got from it, and so eventually I got the chance to see the movie in, I believe, my one and only experience at the ArcLight Cinema over in San Diego, and it was a fantastic, it was very expensive, but it was my first time experiencing such a fantastic, premium, high-quality film-going experience. And this was after I saw the reviews from so many people all raving about this movie. And so having saw it, I really dug the hell out of it. I'm not sure if I ever talked about it on the channel back when it came out, but I'm really glad to get the chance to bring it up here all these years later on Fully Endorsed, because watching this movie, I really grew to fall in love with this movie all over again. So I'm very curious as to know, like, your thoughts on Birdman, Dylan. But first off, were you aware of this movie when it originally came out?
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, it was an Oscar contender. It won some Oscars, I believe, and I follow those typically. So I definitely heard a lot of the buzz. I also knew about it because of the name Birdman and the learning curve of it's not Birdman. I mean, it's Birdman, but it's not that Birdman.
Right. You gotta wonder, like, when they were making this movie, like, I get Batman, Birdman, both begins with a B. Bats are somewhat vaguely similar to birds because they can fly. But you gotta wonder, at some point, did anyone come up to the film crew and say, hey, that name's already taken?
Yeah, I just wonder if anybody knew about Birdman. Maybe Inuri too. Is that his name? Didn't know.
Too. I'm not going to attempt to roll the R's because I can't do the double R's in Spanish.
That's so weird. Maybe he didn't know about Birdman. I don't know. I don't fucking know.
Possibly, but there's got to be someone out there who was like, "Hey, man, maybe this isn't such a good idea." And he was like, "You want to continue working in Hollywood? You're gonna do exactly what I say."
But there's already a Birdman, and he will sue you. He is an attorney at law.
Who cares? We got Batman on our side, and no one fucks with Batman. So it was quite interesting that such a movie came out in 2014. You know, this was 2 years after the Avengers came out, so superhero movies were definitely at an all-time high, with the MCU kind of riding it's that phase 1 victory lap. This was 1 year prior to Man of Steel, but I'm pretty sure people were aware that movie was coming out soon. So yeah, this was definitely around there in like the heyday of the superhero genre, the rebirth of the superhero genre. And its movie does have a lot of interesting things to say about said genre in a way that I feel is very relevant today, given that 6 years later, superhero media is still, you could say, just as prevalent as it was back in 2014.
Yeah, I mean, we just reviewed Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Another bird-themed hero.
And not long before that, we reviewed WandaVision. Two of the most, like, out there, like, from a comic book adaptation perspective, like, just, like, really deep pulls. It's like, we're not even in this, like, skin deep version of comic book movies anymore. We've transitioned beyond that. We've turned everyone into a geek, and now we can start pulling in the obscure shit, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to watch this movie, which is kind of a time capsule of a bygone age in some ways, of this, like, superhero movies are like this new, well, not a new thing, but like it's just starting to really hit its stride.
Right. And it's very interesting. What I love most about this movie is that despite the title and the sort of subject material, it's not really a superhero movie. It's more of one of those movies that's about making, kind of those like movies about making movies. Technically in this case, it's a movie about making the makings of a play. And for me, I really enjoy, as someone who studied film, who studies the art and the craft of film, I always get a kick out of watching a movie about people making movies or making a play or just telling a story in general. And so we get a little peek into into like a sort of stylized version of the realm of Hollywood actors, of stage actors, and sort of like the hostile sort of environment, or the hostilities between both worlds. I always love having a story that kind of like pulls back the curtains and gives the audience a peek into the behind the scenes drama that could occur behind the media that we would often consume. And
absolutely,
yeah,
it was a fun
go
trope.
ahead. Of
I was just saying it's always a fun trope when you have a production within a production.
Right. And so it's very interesting to get a production within a production with the within that sort of like as you mentioned, within this time capsule of superhero popularity. So we have the main character, played by Michael Keaton. His name is Regan Thompson. For a while, I thought it was Reagan Thompson, but no, it's Regan. It's a name I'm not quite familiar with at all. So he was an actor who used to play a superhero called Birdman in the 90s. He eventually, much like Michael Keaton in real life, he stepped away from the role after several movies, and he never really was able to reach that same peak that he had when he was Birdman. But as much as he would love to return to the spotlight, he's very reluctant on embracing that role again because he honestly wanted to put it all behind him. Meanwhile, in an ironic twist of fate, a lot of actors such as Robert Downey Jr., as they name drop him in the movie, they bring these type of actors are becoming more popular than ever by embracing the role that he abandoned roughly 25 years prior. And that's one thing I really love, that they actually name drop actual actors and actual movies and titles in this movie. So it's not like it's not like they're name dropping like parodies of actors and movies beyond Birdman and Regan Thompson. It's like, it just kind of helps you feel more drawn into this world and feel like this is like the real world that the characters are inhabiting.
You know what he should have done? And I'm not entirely sure if I'm talking about Michael Keaton at this point or if I'm talking about the character. Kind of both, really. He should have done what Mark Hamill did and jumped and tried his hand at voice acting, because there's, Mark Hamill, he couldn't get he kept getting typecast because of Luke Skywalker, and then he goes and starts voice acting, and we grew up our entire childhoods not knowing that he was the Joker, and then we got to have that moment of realization, and so he got all this work because there wasn't that expectation of like seeing his face and going, oh, that's Luke Skywalker,
Right. I think that's just the problem, though. We did not know it was Mark Hamill, and that's like mainly kind of like the culture of American the culture that is American voice acting. Unlike Japan, most people, mainstream audiences, couldn't give less of a shit about voice actors, which is sad to hear, but that's honestly kind of what happens in our case. Meanwhile, in Japan, voice actors are kind of treated as celebrities in their own right, I believe. So,
well, I think it's because we're still in this stage, and I think we're coming out of this, especially with our generation and the generation below us, those fucking kids. We're in deep shit, Andres.
Ooh-wee.
I'd hate to see this group fight the next war. No,
I tell you, man, if the draft ever came, I would suck at war. I'm finished being an old man yelling at a cloud now. Point is, I think we're still, as a culture, coming out of this this stage of like, animation is for kids. For so long it was like, nobody knows who these voice actors are because they're children who are watching these animated properties, and children don't pay attention to the credits. It was only once I got older and actually started paying attention to the names in the credits that I was like, Mark Hamill, So it's like, whereas in Japan it's much more commonly accepted that animation is a medium that is for everyone, and so nerds like us will notice these voice actors more easily. That is true. I do think that, like, as we get older, there is an appreciation for actors like Steve Blum, Tara Strong, Kevin Michael Richardson, but I still feel like we're in that. It's still like the appreciation for voice actors is still a bit niche, and at the end of the day, on-screen actors will always be, like, I feel, much more prominent than voice actors, and so for the character of Regan Thompson,
now we have a new problem in America, which is, hey, we're making an animated movie. Let's cast a bunch of people who are already famous for doing live action shit.
Right,
what about all these
celebrity voice actors.
What about all these talented voice actors who that's like all they do, and like they know how to do it better than anybody else? fuck them.
Yeah, and that's how you get fucking Chris Rock, who's over in the Oscars. He's like, "Hey everybody, voice acting is easy," and Tara Strong is like, "The fuck it isn't. You just get to say whatever you want in your natural voice. We gotta get into character."
Yo, Chris Rock. Fucking yeah. And as much as we all love this movie, and it recently celebrated its 20th anniversary, Shrek is partly to blame.
Right.
I really feel like Shrek normalized this.
Let's see. You know, you could make the argument that it kind of goes all the way back to Robin Williams' Genie, which, ironically enough, he did not want his name to be used as like a big selling point, even though Disney ended up doing that.
Yeah, but back then it was always, we're going to get one really well-known star to be in the cast to like help sell the movie, and that's fine. That makes perfect sense. Shrek, I think, I don't know if it was the first one to do this, but it's certainly the most notable like exception I can think of, where they were like all-star cast: Cameron Diaz, Mike Myers, Eddie Murphy.
That is true.
Eventually, Antonio Banderas.
Right.
Who was very famous at the time and has now sort of disappeared from the face of the earth.
Kind of.
This is the last time you ever saw that guy in anything.
Well, anyways, back to with Regan Thompson, his idea. So Regan Thompson in the movie does not become a voice actor. Rather, he decides to become a stage actor. And I can only presume that he wanted to become a stage actor simply because if he tried to get into Hollywood, he'll just be typecasted into a Birdman-esque role. So I suppose that by becoming a stage actor, this was his chance for like a fresh start in a brand new environment. Except now, as we learn, the world of Broadway hates Hollywood actors. They hate the Hollywood landscape. They don't consider Hollywood actors to be real fucking actors. I'm assuming because they could have the chance to, if they screw up, they can always have the chance to do another take until they get the right performance. Meanwhile, with Broadway actors, I presume, as they depict this world through the movie Birdman, stage actors pride themselves on the ability to perform in front of a massive audience and do it all in one single take, with tons and tons of rehearsals and previews and all of that stuff. And they got to perform multiple times for the run of that particular stage show. Yeah, well, gone are the days of William Shakespeare when stage plays were meant to be like entertainment for the masses, which is ironic considering that Shakespeare is often held up as like, the biggest example of like, this is what an intellectual play really should be like, but he was totally writing for his audience. Now with the advent of things like movies and stuff like that, stage plays became more and more niche, and there's this whole like sort of perception of like, this is like real, like intelligent, like academic, like drama, and like Hollywood is just making fucking trite fucking, that whole chestnut, that whole super snobbish way of looking. This is where acting came from. This was the birthplace of acting, where we make art.
Yeah, with the exception of like stage musicals, which still have broad appeal. I think a lot of stage play people can fall into that sort of way of thinking, and so it's definitely something that I've seen, and so I definitely got what they were going for here. Right.
And another piece of criticism that the world of Broadway throws at in this movie was the idea that majority of the most popular stage plays tend to be more about characters, about story, about drama, whereas they try to say that the most popular piece of entertainment in the realm of cinema are just big budget, giant big budget blockbuster action fests that don't require as much skill acting as, say, a Broadway play. And
I'm over here like, we can have both.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what the movie is attempting to say as well. The movie is definitely trying to comment on the current landscape of Broadway and cinema, of Broadway and Hollywood at that time, but it's not trying to say that either direction is bad per se. There's a great moment where Regan Thompson is talking to himself. Throughout the movie, there's an inner voice in his head, and it's like the personification of Birdman. Kind of like if you've ever read like a Batman comic, especially like Dark Knight Returns, Bruce Wayne would have Batman's voice like as representing his inner conscience, yelling at him. He's like, "What the fuck are you doing, you piece of shit? Go out there and kick some ass." And that's kind of like what they're doing here, where he has this inner conscience in the form of his Birdman character / persona, who's constantly berating him on all the mistakes he's made in life, telling him how weak and useless and pathetic he is, and how he should just say fuck it and go back to doing Birdman because that's like the easiest thing he could do.
Right.
And he's trying to tell him, people don't want this like drama horse shit. People just want to see explosions and action and CGI and all this stuff. And it's like, as popular, I don't feel like it's an attack per se, but it's just sort of like his inner perception on is what I'm doing worth anything? He's got like, it's just that he's like his Birdman persona is like the representation of all his inner doubts.
Right.
So it's all very interesting just to hear this sort of like this sort of commentary on the state of entertainment, and I feel like it takes a very respectable approach to it, where it's not lambasting like either side, nor is it saying anyone who enjoys either or is a complete idiot. And I feel like, like I said, they take the most appropriate and respectful, mature route possible, and just as you said, Dylan, that you can. There's room for everything, honestly.
Yeah.
And what else to bring up? Another big aspect about this is, of course, Regan Thompson. This is a personal drama focused on Michael Keaton's character, and I gotta say he does a fantastic job at portraying this very broken, disheveled, pathetic character who just simply wants to be. This is a man who is very concerned with how other people think about him, how other people view him, and he wants to be seen in a positive light by his peers, by his audience. He wants to be adored and respected and loved. This is a man who cares more about the respect of strangers more than the respect of those closest to him, and that's kind of like the main lesson that he learns over the course of this movie, which I believe the story takes place over the course of like 2 or 3 days, I think. And it's a very important message, I feel, because for many people they can get lost in, especially for people that I've seen on YouTube. They get lost in the shuffle, they get lost in the drive to want to reach that level of spotlight and fame and popularity, but they end up sacrificing basically everything to acquire that level of fame, said fame and popularity.
And they get canceled anyway, so what does it matter?
I mean, that's kind of like what happens to, not what happens to Regan, but in this case, he tries so hard, but it feels like at this point in his life, so many of his endeavors ultimately went to shit, and so he's just left like picking up the pieces of his broken life, as we learn about his estranged relationship to his daughter, played by Emma Thompson. He has a girlfriend. Emma Stone. There's too many Emmas in Hollywood, I think. We have Emma Stone as his formerly drug addicted daughter, who recently went through rehab and is currently working with her father on this production as a means of giving her something to do and not fall back on drugs. He has Regan also has this girlfriend who is one of the actresses in this play that he pays barely any attention to. And there's also his ex-wife, who tries to maintain somewhat of a healthy relationship with her ex-husband and her daughter, but again is constantly reminded of why she ended up leaving him in the first place.
And then there's Edward Norton, who is playing himself.
Right. Not only do we have Michael Keaton playing a version of himself, but we have Edward Norton, as you said, playing a version of himself. And from what I understand with Edward Norton, he's one of those actors who he's very, very talented, but he definitely has a habit of trying to put too much input into the writer and director's trying to like how do you say he ends up like stepping over the toes of the writer, director, producers in terms of how a certain scene or line or character stuff is supposed to go about. And you see that replicated here as well, as he is giving a lot of, at first, seemingly very helpful input on the script for this play that they're working on, but then he essentially becomes a diva. He's like, no, this is wrong, this is all wrong, it's got to be this, it's got to be that, it's got to be more real, everything's got to be real, the fruit has to be real, the wine has to be real, my boner has to be real, all the sex has to be real.
He keeps it real, Andres.
The gun has to be real.
That wasn't his idea. It's important to remember again that this movie came out 1 year after the Avengers, in which he had just been replaced as the Hulk.
Yes.
And the reason that he and Marvel parted ways, shall we say, is because of this kind of shit.
Right. And this is also a similar thing that occurred in, American History X. Are you familiar with what happened behind the scenes there, Dylan?
No, what's the story?
So what happened with American History X was, I recently went to, not recently, this is way back when, like 2012, 2013, there was like a panel at my university where there was a live screening of American History X, as well followed up by a live Q&A with the writer of that movie. And this writer, he had the rare chance that not many Hollywood writers got, where he got to be on stage, not on stage, he got to be on the set of the filming of that movie, and pretty much like oversaw everything going on alongside the director. And he also saw that Edward Norton also gave a lot of input on the direction of that movie and the handling of his character and the story and dialogue and whatnot. But it eventually got to a point where the director kept going back and making changes in the editing room during post-production, and it got to a point where both the writer and Edward Norton were like, okay, if he continues to make so many of these changes, this movie's never going to get released, and the movie's already perfect the way it is. The more changes he's making to it, the worse he's making that movie. So I don't know how, but both Edward Norton and the writer of that movie essentially took control away from the director, and they finished editing the movie, and that's what we eventually got for the theatrical release.
Huh. What, did they get the studio on their side or something?
Most likely, yeah. I can only assume that they were able to convince the studio to relinquish control of the film away from the director, simply because they thought that he was doing more harm than good with his constant interference, his constant involvement in the editing process or post-production process.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so this really, again, this really adds a lot more context in terms of Edward Norton's character when he's constantly like interrupting other actors and constantly giving his own input, potentially to the detriment of the play itself and the entire experience as a whole. Because I remember when there was that one scene where they were doing a preview night, and there was a part where they were doing that scene, that the dinner table scene that we revisit multiple times throughout the movie, and things were going great, but Edward Norton's character just fucks it all up simply because they're not drinking real wine, and he begins to just essentially tell the audience to fuck off.
Right. Yes. That's probably the most Edward Norton scene.
And one thing to note is that it's also interesting that we have 3 actors here. Edward Norton, Emma Stone, and Michael Keaton, all of which were former superhero actors. Obviously, we had Edward Norton from The Incredible Hulk, Michael Keaton from Batman, and Emma Stone from The Amazing Spider-Man duology. So there's definitely some sort of like meta. It's had to have been some kind of meta commentary. It's meant to, like, I feel like it's supposed to add more to the meta commentary of actors attempting to find life beyond the popular trend of beyond the trend of what's currently popular right now.
It's very true. And we have Zach Galifianakis, who's trying to be anything but the character from The Hangover.
Yeah, that was certainly crazy to see, because, yeah, in this movie, he plays, I believe, his Riggin Thompson's producer / best friend. Oh, no, his best friend and lawyer, who is also producing the play. So it's really odd seeing Zach Galifianakis play like a straight role. By that I mean a non-comedic role, a dramatic role.
I'm used to him being so gay. No, yeah, I know what you mean.
God damn it. Not seeing him act like a complete and total man-child buffoon character, it did took me back a bit. But it's really cool to see him in this kind of a role, because it kind of reminds you, oh yeah, he's actually a really good actor. He's not like a comedic one-trick pony here.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting to see him not be Zach Galifianakis for a while. He's like the voice of reason in this movie.
Right, yeah, he is. And he does have some, like, he does make some morally gray actions, but at the same time, he's mostly concerned with Riggins' public image, so he's constantly making decisions that would help Riggins' reputation in terms of, like, trying to get the best reviews from the press, trying to keep his Riggins' social media completely squeaky clean, or whenever there's like a potential lawsuit from one actor who had to be removed from the production early on, he has to make sure that things go smoothly with that whole ordeal. So there are some times where he headbutts with a lot of people, especially with Riggin, when Riggin was like, I want Edward Norton off of my movie, I don't want him here, and Zach has to say, hey man, we can't afford to lose him. He's the only reason why anyone's going to be interested in this play, so he's got to be involved.
Right, because we failed to mention Edward Norton's character is a beloved Broadway icon star guy.
Yes.
So his being attached to the play is like a huge PR boon for them.
Right.
And he gets in there because he's dating Naomi Watts, who is already in the play, and she hooks them up with him.
Yes, that's the thing. Or they had a history of dating each other. They mentioned that Naomi Watts' character, who some of my subscribers may remember her as, I believe, her Ann Darrow from Kong 05. Great to see her again, by the way, after all these years.
Yeah, she's been in other things, just nothing that
mainstream.
Is in our wheelhouse, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah. So Naomi Watts, she mentions that she also had a former history. She had like a past history with Edward Norton's character, and that's a whole other like can of worms that opens up for us over the course of this movie. So the interesting thing about Edward Norton's character is that he happens to have this sort of duality, this sort of like very personal issue where, as much as he would like to make things as realistic as possible on the stage, he has a issue being real, ironically, in real life, as his like shitty behavior is constantly pushing everyone's buttons and pushing away the people from getting too close to him. And I found that to be like a very interesting. I found that to be a very interesting aspect of his character. What do you think?
Absolutely, and the whole detail about his penis not working except on the stage.
Right, which did lead to a rather uncomfortable scene between him and Naomi Watts.
Yes.
I mean, at that point, you gotta wonder what's worse, dealing with his horniness or Kong's.
Oh, that's or apes.
Or apes.
Yeah.
Red Letter Media fans can realize when we recorded this part of the show.
Yeah. That video just came out today, if anybody's seen it. And I was so excited.
And you just couldn't hide it.
A asterisk P asterisk E, as we've always called it.
Let's see. So, yeah, on top of the whole, like, penis thing, there was that part where he's like, they were having this, it was a preview night, and they were rehearsing this scene that that the audience, not the movie audience, but like the real world audience can see multiple times. So it's that, that dinner table scene, and everything is going well, and except Edward Norton's character just has to fuck it up just because the wine wasn't real.
That's probably like, no, the biggest dick move in the movie is when he steals Michael Keaton's story about
yes,
the napkin.
Right.
That's like the biggest, like, fuck you, Edward Norton, in the movie. But second is probably when he tried to rape that chick. He's just a dick the whole movie.
Yes. I think I remember, like, when Michael Keaton was kicking his ass, you were like, yeah, get him, Batman, kick his ass.
Right.
When they were just fighting in his underwear, he was just fighting in his underwear.
I've never wanted to see the whole the Batman kick Hulk's ass before, but in this instance, I would have supported it.
And yeah, you're right. To go more in depth with what you were talking about there, the reason why Riggin Thompson wants to make a stage adaptation of this short story, which apparently is very real, it's called like What We Talk About when we talk about love. I believe that's the title. And he wanted to do that because when he was like a kid in a school play, he received a little note written on a cocktail napkin from the writer of that short story, telling him that, encouraging him to pursue acting. And ever since this was like his way of personally paying respect to the person who inspired him in the first place. And Edward, again, being the dick that he is like, man, look, it's a cocktail napkin. He was probably drunk. He didn't mean it. He was being complimentary. Only for him to, go behind his back and steal that backstory, essentially, and claim it as his own in an interview in a magazine or a newspaper story set to help promote the play.
He stole man's story, and then he went and banged his daughter. And this was...
Yeah.
This was a little bit of an issue for me in the film. This is probably my only like real criticism of the movie. I felt like the subplot, the romance, or not even romance, but just
sort of like friends with benefits sort of deal.
The tryst, if you will, between Emma Stone and Edward Norton. I wasn't entirely sure if I bought it, but the bigger issue with it was that I don't know. It felt like they were building to something that just never happened, because there's that scene where Michael Keaton sees them together and he clearly knows what's going on, and he knows firsthand that Edward Norton is like a huge dick. Like, this is not long after the whole the fight when Edward Norton stole his story, and then he like went in there and fucking punched him in the face.
And the what was it? Was this like also after the potential rape scene?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
So like he knows that this guy is bad news, and it felt like, oh, he's gonna like, confront him or her or both of them. Something is gonna come of this. This is gonna be a plot point. And then it just sort of disappears from the movie. It's never addressed again. It never plays into anything.
That's
and
very
I don't
true.
know. It felt like I don't know if missed opportunity or wasted potential is what I'm trying to get at here, but it just felt like something should have happened with that.
That's true, yeah. For the rest of the movie, from that point onwards, it was like the movie was dead set on focusing on Michael Keaton's character and his sort of existential crisis, meanwhile kind of pushing everyone else aside as the spotlight goes solely on him.
Yeah, because Edward Norton's whole like story, his like subplot and everything, just kind of ends at that point. You only see him from that point forward, acting in the play.
True, yeah. We don't really get so much that much of a resolution with him and whether or not he ends up being able to overcome his personal shit.
Right. I wanted to see some kind of comeuppance too. Like I wanted something bad to happen.
Right.
Like, violent. I just wanted
I mean, we do get a sort of violence, which I guess we'll go to briefly go into here. Like, he's talking. It's kind of like an ironic twist of fate that he's constantly telling Michael Keaton to embrace as much real, raw emotion, put as much realism into the performance as possible. So when the time comes for Michael Keaton's character to off himself, he ends up using a real gun at that particular scene. But
right.
to bring up the other scene when you mentioned that he sees Emma Stone and Edward Norton getting together. There's that part where rather than confronting him, he just kind of wants to clear his mind, grab a smoke, go outside, and kind of blow things off, wait for things to blow things off before he goes back and do his performance. And that does lead to one of the best scenes in the movie, however. So that's why he doesn't bother me as much, because then otherwise we wouldn't get this scene in particular. And that's a scene where he is outside. The door to the backstage door, which can only be opened from the inside, accidentally closes on his robe. So not only can he not open up that door, but his robe is stuck in that door. So he is forced to just strip down to his underwear, his shoes, socks, and underwear, and just parade down fucking Times Square, completely exposed to everyone around him, passing by a marching band and a bunch of costumed people doing that kind of stuff for tips, until he eventually gets back into the theater and just seemingly doing a sort of one of those interactive theater experiences, an impromptu interactive theater experience where he comes in and just recites the lines he's supposed to do as he walks back on stage in his underwear as someone passes him a prop gun.
My favorite part of it, I almost wish they hadn't passed him that prop gun, because my favorite part is when he comes back in and he's just doing a finger gun.
Yes.
He's just walking down the middle of the aisle giving this dramatic performance.
Yeah.
Doing a finger gun.
You got to wonder if there's got to be some sort of symbolism there of him just he kind of like one of those the emperor has no clothes, just exposing himself for the man he is. Literally, yes. Metaphorically, literally, physically, mentally, just laying it all out there for the world to see.
Ooh-wee. And to top it all off, to make it even more pathetic, he's in fucking tighty whities, and
yes,
I have to believe in my heart that was a decision on the part of the filmmakers. I can't believe that Michael Keaton wears tighty whities. I can't have that be my reality moving forward. No, thank you.
I mean, like black briefs on Batman, that's perfectly fine. When they're white, no, just no. Blue,
Exactly.
Blue maybe, but not white.
Also, I always thought that the black part on Superman's pants and Batman's pants was or the black part. I didn't think it was briefs over pants. I always just thought that part of the pants was colored.
Was another color.
Yeah, just to show off the goods. You know what I mean?
True.
That's why Robin has that aggressive codpiece in Batman Forever.
Oh God. I'm sure Michael Keaton could have certainly used a codpiece in that scene.
Boys and girls listening to this, if you've never paid attention to Chris O'Donnell's codpiece from Batman Forever, go look up an image. And as I said, it is aggressive.
I'd never heard of a codpiece described that way, but you're right. Now here's a disturbing thought.
It's frankly off-putting once you notice it.
Yes.
And I feel like the next time I watch the movie, it's something will have changed.
Now here's a disturbing thought. So there's that scene where Edward Norton wants to have a legit sex scene on stage because he has an erection, and as soon as his character gets out of bed, there's a brief moment where everyone is laughing at him because he, as you see very briefly, he does have a massive bulge under his tighty whities. So I gotta wonder. Yes. If this
Not Chris O'Donnell from Batman Forever huge, but you know,
so I gotta
very
wonder,
noticeable.
I gotta wonder, is that a prop or is it actually real?
You think that? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Is that Edward Norton's penis? Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, we see his ass at one point in the movie.
I mean, sure, yeah. Right. I mean, why pay for a prosthetic? It's under underwear anyway, so it's not like you're gonna get an X rating.
Imagine like Edward Norton does like the exact same thing his character does. It's like, no, it's gotta be real, man. It's gotta be real. Listen to me, Alejandro. I can do this, okay? I can focus on my erection and my performance at the same time. I'm that good of an actor.
Just let me jerk off on film, Alejandro, just once.
And Alejandro's like, yeah.
And he's just like, no. I don't think we can do that.
Oh, God.
Not even the New Mexicans would do that, eh?
Not even the New Mexicans, Dylan. So, anyways, so we've talked enough about the characters and the plot. Now, I am very curious. I do definitely want to go into the production side, and what this movie is definitely very notable for is its score and its cinematography. Both of which takes a very really unique idea. Not so much unique as in it's never been done before. It has been done before, but the way they approach the makings of this movie, everything surrounding this plot, it helps enforce this sort of very weird, bizarre, dreamlike quality to this film. That being the score that is primarily composed of percussions and like jazz drumming, and the cinematography, which does a lot of digital trickery, either digital trickery to make it or like some like practical effects, and perhaps to make it all feel like it's one single shot from beginning to end with like very few cutaways.
Yes.
The only time that there is a cut is either like at the beginning of the movie, where you see like an imagery of a meteor falling down to Earth, and the other part being like the end of the movie, where it's sort of like Reagan, after shooting himself on stage, he has sort of like a light flashing before his eyes sort of deal, where you see random people from Times Square on the stage, and you cut back to that meteor falling down to Earth.
Those are the only noticeable cuts. Obviously, there are plenty of cuts in the movie, but they're all cleverly disguised through one form of camera trickery or another to make it feel as if it's all just one continuous shot. And there are moments when you know it can't be. Mm-hmm. Like the moment I noticed when Edward Norton and Emma Stone are banging in the rafters, and then you pan down and all of a sudden Edward Norton is at the table doing the scene. So like clearly, unless Edward Norton has a twin brother or a clone or can teleport, that there was a cut there.
He's just that good of an actor, Dylan.
My God. Unless they CG'd Ed Norton's face onto a stunt double and then panned over to real Ed Norton, there's got to be a cut in there somewhere.
And what was another thing? Whether or not that's one thing I definitely want to look back in terms of the special features for this movie. This is a movie that I do own, but I haven't actually like looked at the special features in all these years. But I would love to now go back and see just where exactly did they make the cuts, and how were they able to piece this film together? Because for them to be able to blur the lines between what is or isn't a single shot is extremely impressive. And I gotta give like major props or major credit to everybody on board in this project for making it as convincing as possible, for able to have these such long, uninterrupting sequences where characters like come and go, constantly coming in and out of the scene, the shots, as if this was a real life stage production that, you know, people are constantly walking in and out of rooms and changing costumes and getting ready, all without like how do you say all while like keep staying in character and keeping the shot going for as long as possible. One thing I also really enjoy about the way this movie is shot is that you constantly see practically every single major room within this theater, this backstage theater setting. And so by revisiting a lot of these same rooms, these same hallways, these same dressing rooms, you get the feeling that this is a very small, cramped, almost claustrophobic setting. And you can feel the sort of like tension building within this very uncomfortable situation that Riggan finds himself in.
Absolutely, and it feels like a real place too. It doesn't feel like, I mean, maybe they did film in a real theater, I don't fucking know, but it doesn't feel like a set. It doesn't feel like an invention. It feels like a real, breathable space. You feel as if you know your way around it. By the end of the movie, I mean, you've certainly seen the cameras go through it enough times. Like it's very grounded in that way. It feels very realistic.
For sure. And what did you think about the percussion, the drum score?
Very interesting. You don't see that a lot, and I thought that it really worked for this movie. It felt like a representation of Riggan's sort of chaotic inner life, his sort of inner dialogue. There were times watching the movie where I felt like fucking John Sims the Master, just going like the fucking drums. But
for sure,
does that drummer never get fucking tired?
No, I bet not. You do actually see the drummer, in a few sequences here and there, so I can only assume that he's like another. He's another figment of Riggan's imagination, because at one point he just passes by an empty room in the theater and he's just there drumming away.
Right. Either he's a hallucination, like other things may or may not be. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But or the movie's just breaking the fourth wall.
Right. Either way, it really these aspects do definitely help give this movie a unique identity of its own, to call its own.
Absolutely.
And now, finally, like, the big thing here are, like, the special effects. And for anyone who's never seen this movie are probably thinking, what kind of special effects can you get out of a movie about a production within a production? Well, let me tell you, if you haven't seen the trailer, one of the most curious things about this movie is the fact that they portray... at first glance, they seemingly portray Michael Keaton's character as having actual superpowers, as on a few occasions, whenever he's all by himself, for the most part, he displays telekinesis. Usually whenever he's very angry, he'd like move stuff with his mind and thrash a bunch of stuff around. Or there's a scene where he is gliding around the New York City, and that's like the one time where the music changes, perhaps to enhance the idea that this is a fantasy, where the score the drums are switched out for like an orchestral score. And finally, there is this like alternate persona that I think I may have mentioned already, where he imagines his like the Birdman voice in his head manifests as a real person, either walking next to him or flying over him, continuing to berate him and tell him what a useless pile of shit he is. And just kind of trying to remind him, it's like, you were the original, man. You were the original superhero actor. Come on, show those motherfuckers who the real man is. And and during that sequence also, he tries to play in his mind the typical summer blockbuster action movie schlock that movie-going audiences would rather watch than whatever passion projects Riggan wants to do. So you see a bunch of like army soldiers fighting off some like meteors and a giant robot bird. So this is, you could probably tell, like, this is where the majority of the budget went into this movie, if not the star-studded cast that they got on board for this film.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a great way of visualizing the sort of inner turmoil that the character is going through by having him basically talk to himself throughout the entire movie. And, you could interpret this movie as he's an actor who secretly has superpowers, but I don't think that's the idea. I think it's more just supposed to be representative of his desires. He's a character who wants to be important. He wants to be special. He wants to be way more than he actually is. And so he has this fantasy world inside of his head where he, can move objects with his mind and fly.
That's true. It definitely shows that, like, he, as much as he resents the idea of going back and playing Birdman again, it is very indicative that he yearns for the type of stardom that current actors like Chris Hemsworth or Robert Downey Jr. Or Chris Pratt are all enjoying right now as a result of, like, the MCU. So it's like, it does make sense that, if this really is all in his head, that he'd imagine himself as one of those sort of larger than life characters that everyone would pay attention to.
Absolutely.
And there are constant, like, the fact that for the most part he never shows off his powers in front of anybody, that it really, like, kind of blurs the line between what is or isn't real. But there are clues in there that kind of give hints that it might be real or it might not be real. The biggest one that you caught on was that when he was flying around New York and eventually he lands down, nobody bats an eye at him, and he walks into the theater. But then, following that, there is a taxi cab driver who goes in to follow him, demanding that he pay his fare.
Right, implying that he wasn't actually flying through the city and, in fact, had taken a cab.
Right. And the only other sequence that we kind of have like that, but in the opposite way, is that at the end of the movie, after he miraculously survives shooting himself, which apparently he didn't shoot himself in the head, rather he shot himself in the nose. At least that's what we're told of. We'll get into that later. He decides to walk out the window, and so Emma Stone, his daughter, comes in, sees that he's not there, looks out the window, looks up at what we can presume to be a flying Michael Keaton, and smiles. So I guess this can lead to us interpreting just what's up with that ending.
Yeah, so the interpretation that I've come to through our discussions is that I don't think Michael Keaton actually survived. I think he died when he shot himself in the because I didn't buy that whole "you shot your nose off" thing for like a second.
I did mention I'll get to that, and I was going to get to that, and I guess this is it, where the angle at which they shoot this scene, it's like a behind the back perspective, and so you can't really tell where his gun is. Whether or not it's, like, forward enough to shoot his nose or back enough to shoot him in the head. So I guess, like, perhaps that was another intentional situation where they shot it to where it could be either or.
Right. But I just, like I said, I don't buy it at all. I don't think that he did shoot himself in the head and survive. Or he did shoot himself in the I don't think that he missed and shot himself in the nose, because it was point blank. I mean, he would have to just be the worst shot in ever, in the history of the world. And it's not even the idea that, like, you can't shoot yourself in the head and survive. There are rare occasions where people have shot themselves in the head and survived. You'd be surprised what you can live through. There's that famous case of that guy who had the railroad spike shot through his fucking head, and he lived for a while.
Yeah.
It's the fact that they tried to play it off as like, oh, you missed and hit your nose. That's the part that I found very difficult to believe. Because he was holding that gun up to his fucking temple, man. It was... Because, that's where you hold a gun when you're trying to shoot yourself. I don't know why that's the default. Maybe it's just that movies have drilled that into our heads. But when somebody tries to shoot themselves, they go for the temple.
Maybe he just changed his mind, Dylan, at the last second.
Like maybe he jerked his hand away right before he pulled the trigger, and
or maybe
got his nose. I mean, I guess that's possible.
Or maybe it's just like the force of the bullet just kind of like threw his aim off.
I guess that's possible, although a stretch, if I do say so, and that's certainly not the way the scene appears to play out in the film.
I guess for my personal interpretation, I tend to be like the more optimistic kind of thinker, and so I'm thinking maybe, you know, he did survive, and that him flying out of his window, that's just him, kind of a representation of him sort of like ascending to, he's now reached a level of what do you call inner peace. He's kind of like left his old life behind, and he's ready to embrace this new future where he spends the time focusing on the things that truly matter to him. And prior to that, he does take off the bandages, and his nose is surprisingly pretty decent for someone who shot their nose off. So
right, suspicious.
So it's very possible that like when Emma Stone comes in and sees and smiles, that's probably like representing her smiling at the fact that she can tell that her father's going to be okay, or that she's just smiling that his nose looks pretty good despite what happened. One thing that... Go ahead. It's like, that's a story. Batman's dead. Bye.
I just think he's dead. I just don't think he... I think all of that is a hallucination that he's having as he's dying.
Like
bleeding out on the stage.
Do you remember that movie, All That Jazz, with, what's his name, Roy Scheider from Jaws?
Kind of.
Because at the end of the movie, he has like he goes through like the 7 stages of grief, no, or like the 7 stages of death, and by the time he comes to acceptance, he ends up seeing everybody in his life throughout his entire life before he eventually dies. Spoilers for a movie from the 70s, I think.
Sounds like a real blast.
So one last thing that happens prior to that ending. So Michael Keaton's character, he takes off the bandages, looks at himself, goes to the bathroom in his hospital room, looks at himself in the mirror, and through the reflection of the mirror, we see the Birdman persona one last time. Only this time, he is sitting on a toilet and doesn't say a single word, and almost has like a look of defeat on him. And I kind of interpret that as Michael. Well,
you know, it's hard. It's hard to look very victorious when you're taking a shit. To
exactly.
Be fair.
Exactly. That's the thing, though. In my interpretation of that was that Michael Keaton finally has his shit together and is able to shut that voice up. With him now being in a very compromised position, and Mike Riggin now looking down on this persona rather than the other way around, which is what we've seen up to this point.
I think that's a valid interpretation. I don't have a counter interpretation. I really didn't think very much about that whole thing. So that interpretation is just as good as any, I think.
Although I think you may have mentioned before in a past conversation that you probably saw that as them reaching like a mutual agreement with one another, which is why neither said anything to the other.
Yeah, I feel like the whole movie is about him trying to reconcile between his past as being the Birdman guy and what he wants for the future, and I think perhaps that such a reckoning has been reached by the end. Right.
It is kind of ironic that Riggins' character has managed to move on from Birdman by the end of this movie, because, as we now know, Michael Keaton may very well be coming back to portray Batman in that Flashpoint movie.
If he does that, that'll be like the only reason I go see that fucking movie.
Same.
I'm so done with DC at this point. It's not even funny.
Let's see. The one last thing I did want to bring up in the movie was there's a commentary on a particular kind of critic that really hits close to home, given that becoming a film critic is what I personally aspire to be. And in the movie, we see this very...
Imagine criticizing films on the internet. Who would do
right? A loser, that's who.
What kind of an asshole?
They're probably just staying. All they do is just stay at home, washing their DVDs collection.
He's at home, washing his tights.
His tiny whiteys.
Oh, his tiny whiteys.
So in the movie, they introduce this one last character, who's this like crotchety old woman with a massive stick up her ass. She hates anything and everything to do with Regan Thompson, but when she eventually meets, when Michael Keaton's character tries to, in a way, try to not make peace with her, but try to establish a good relationship with her, she essentially kind of like throws that attitude back in his face and say, I don't care how your play is, I'm just going to make the worst, most scathing review possible for your play, just so that you Hollywood types can get the hell out of Broadway. So I feel like that there is definitely that huge amount of bias going on in not just like Broadway, but also just like Hollywood, just when it comes to critics in general, whether it's restaurant critics, book critics, film critics, theater, stage critics. There's these critics who do have a certain amount of bias going into a production, expecting to hate something or totally opposite, completely blindly love something. And that is definitely a major problem when your job is to explain what it is that you like or dislike about a movie. And another thing that Regan later comments on is how she never really delves into her reasonings for why she thinks the way that she does of a certain production. All she cares about are just flashy, attention-grabbing headlines, just making a lot of like, oh, this thing is really, really good, this thing is really, really bad, and never expounding upon it. This was something that I believe that our mutual friend Patrick Galvin brought up when he and I recorded a podcast discussing on the merits of film criticism and whether or not critics do still matter in the current landscape of entertainment. And he also brought up that same issue that he had, when you had these critics that focus more on the headlines, less so about the actual critique itself. And as someone who has, studied in film when it comes to critical studies, and someone who has practiced a lot when it comes to writing persuasive pieces, that is essential to a critic job. So I couldn't agree more with how this movie handles its critiques. Its critiques on the critics.
Indeed. Bias among critics? Why, I never.
Any thoughts on that?
Perish the thought on this. Yeah, I thought that was all really good and really well handled and very true. I mean, it's I think we've all bumped into that kind of criticism before in the past. I can think of certain YouTube channels that have come under fire for such simplistic things in the past. Cough, cough, cinema sins, cough, cough, nostalgia critic.
Right.
Not to name any names, but so yeah, I thought all that was really poignant and really well handled. And again, it goes back to the whole thing about this movie kind of being a time capsule for the time that it came out in. I mean, the whole snobby film critic response to the MCU and just the rise of superhero films in general, that's still going on.
That is true, yeah. It can be very interesting that, for a movie that kind of, has a lot to say on the current landscape of entertainment at that time, it's surprising that a movie of this subject material would end up getting, winning so many Oscars, being such an Oscar darling back then. Because, normally this is the sort of thing that I guess you would expect for a Oscar movie to be, because it's so much more really focused on, the human drama sort of deal. But, movies like this and, say, The Shape of Water really took me aback by just how they were willing to let movies like these have that sort of Oscar spotlight.
Absolutely. I agree.
And I guess this is a good a good segue to talk about the Academy Awards that this movie ended up winning and was nominated for. according to what I was able to look up, it was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, Emma Stone, Best Sound Mixing, Frank A. Montano and someone else, Best Supporting Actor, Edward Norton, Best Sound Editing, Best Actor, Michael Keaton, and it actually won Best Picture, Best Cinematography, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay.
Yeah, I remember the Oscars that year. It did very well.
Yes. This was pretty much was like the big hit. Like, you could tell every Oscar season, there's always that one movie that just takes the majority of the winnings. And
I mean, the most amazing one was that year that Lord of the Rings just fucking won every award, Andres.
It's like there's no point in even having a ceremony. They're just like, fuck it, you know who won. Bring Peter Jackson out here for like the 20th time.
All of the awards.
All the awards. He has all the medals!
How many medals does he have?
He has all the medals. He has all the cans of tuna. That's another Red Letter Media reference, folks.
He's the best at everything.
Well, that's certainly the case in terms of Alejandro González Iñárritu. He is the best at everything. and with him, Guillermo del Toro and Alejandro Cuarón, I can definitely say that us Mexicans, we're taking over Hollywood. God damn it! It is our time to shine, motherfuckers.
Alfonso Cuarón, not Alejandro.
Oh, sorry, I'm a dumbass. Man, I come across like a new Mexican.
Ooh-wee.
One thing I also want to mention was that during his acceptance speech, when he received the Best Picture Oscar for Birdman, Alejandro Iñárritu made this speech that really resonated with me as a Mexican American, when he said, and I quote, "I want to dedicate this award for my fellow Mexicans, the ones who live in Mexico. I pray that we can build the government that we deserve, and the ones living in this country who are part of the latest generation of immigrants in this country, I just pray they can be treated with the same dignity and respect of the ones who came before and built this incredible immigration nation." So those words really hit me deep and essentially reflected my own thoughts on the country that my family came from, as well as, the country that I was born of. Like, the two countries that I identify the most to, it hits me on like on that very personal level, and I couldn't be happier for Alejandro for making it this far in Hollywood. We could, of course, the Oscars, a lot of people, including ourselves, would probably tell you that the Oscars don't matter, that it's all a bunch of just like, Hollywood elites just having one big giant circle jerk. But the fact of the matter is that there are people who pay attention heavily to the Oscars, and that winning an Oscar could lead to huge opportunities down the line for those who are nominated or who win the actual awards. So in terms of, since then, I feel like Iñárritu has had a great career since then. I believe he also won another Oscar for Best Picture with The Revenant. He even got he himself got Leonardo DiCaprio that Oscar that he has evaded him all his life up until then. So I will say that I am extremely happy for him. I'm happy for everyone involved in this film, in this production, and hopefully since this movie came out, that all of these people have gone on to do bigger and better things.
Yeah, I mean, listen, no matter your stance on the Oscars, whether you agree with them or not, and sometimes they fuck up and they give awards to movies that don't necessarily deserve it, or they do that whole legacy Oscar thing where they give an Oscar to somebody who doesn't deserve it just because they got snubbed in the past. There's a lot of bullshit like that goes on. But regardless of all that, at the end of the day, it's nice when they get it right. It's nice when a movie that deserves it gets the recognition that it deserves. And it's also nice when the people who won those awards get to use that prestige to further their careers. And hey, it's still better than the Golden Globes. So.
What are the Golden Globes anyways? What exactly is their purpose?
I've never watched one. Here's what I know. It's an award show that's hosted by the Hollywood Foreign Press, and they're known for basically all the celebrities just basically go there to get drunk and party, and they hand out awards. And a couple of years they got Ricky Gervais, and he did really great opening acts where he sort of criticized the whole affair, and that was cool. But beyond that, they're real. Beyond that, it's pretty pointless. And this year, I believe that they were actually dropped from whatever the network is that normally host them due to things behind the scenes. That's a whole other ball of wax. Basically, that whole Oscars so white controversy from a few years ago. They basically had that same thing happen to them. But way worse.
They're in trouble. Something's come along and it's burst their bubble. Meanwhile, Ricky Gervais is just laughing his way to the bank.
He's like, I got my money.
Yep. And let's see. So, anything left to talk about with Birdman before we go into final thoughts?
I don't know. Let me think good and hard about this. I think we've covered everything. I mean, you've got your notes.
Yes, and we pretty much reached the end of them. So, yeah, I guess this would be a perfect time for final thoughts. So, yeah. Dylan, would you fully endorse Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance?
No, of course I would. It's a great fucking movie. It won all those Oscars for a reason. It's very well made. Go watch it. It's the first movie by Alejandro Iñárritu that I've actually sat down to watch, I believe. I had heard his name before. YMS talks about him sometimes. He's like his favorite director, I think. And it's very well done. Masterful, you might say. Again, it's a time capsule of a era in film that has gone by nearly a decade ago at this point, and it's fun to look at for that reason as well. And also, just it's very well written. It's superbly acted all around. The cast all do fantastic jobs. So yeah, go check it out.
Awesome. You pretty much took the words right out of my mouth, Dylan. I was really glad to have this experience to, as I probably mentioned at the beginning, to watch this movie and fall in love with it all over again, to remind me just how great this was. There are often movies that often get a lot of that sort of artificial hype, usually through its own marketing campaign. But this is a movie that had a lot of hype built around it, simply based on just pure word of mouth. And I would honestly say that this is a movie that truly does live up to that critical hype. So if you ever are interested in these actors, or if you're interested in stories about productions within productions, or just a movie that's just a nice little meta commentary on the state of entertainment circa 2014, or you just want to see a damn good drama, I implore you guys to check out Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance.
You just really want to see Ed Norton's ass for some reason.
Yes, you can see that, or his giant bulge,
which may or may not be fake. The jury is out.
Yes. So, what are we going to talk about next time, Dylan?
Next time, we are going to watch a cult classic comedy from the 1980s, starring one of your favorite celebrities and mine, Mr. Tim Curry. I am, of course, referring to Clue, based on the murder mystery board game of the same name. And much like this movie, it has a stacked cast. So look out for that.
Smashing! I've never played the board game. I've never watched the movie. It's one of those things, like, to pull up Professor Bryce, it's one of those things that I've always heard about, but have never actually seen. So I'm really looking forward to next time. So please do join us, everybody. I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiji Noir.
And I've been Super DM64.
And until next time, folks, take care.